Hello everyone and welcome back to Intro to Python here on Cybrary On Demand. I, as always, am your instructor, Joe Perry, and as always, I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you about programming basics. Today we're going to be focusing on variables because we are in Lesson 2. So the objectives in this lesson, we're going to talk about the concept of variables, what they are, what they're for, what they do. We're going to learn about the different generic variable types. Now this is a very broad description of the variable types. There are a lot of subtypes of these. There are a lot of people who will disagree about sort of what a generic variable even means. But for the course of this video, because I'm the one making the recording, I get to decide what is and is not going to be covered. And I'm going to say that there are numbers, there are strings, and there are structures. Variables, what are they? What are they for? What do they do? The best way to describe variables is Tupperware for your brain. Variables can be really tricky for new people to learn. A lot of people get very wrapped around the axle with the concept of them. And the truth is that they're not nearly as complicated as they seem. They're not nearly as complicated as you may unintentionally make them seem. In reality, variables in programming work exactly the same way as they do in math. In math, you have a variable that represents an unknown value, right? X, when you're searching for X, all you're trying to do is figure out what that unknown value is. But the point stands that it's there to represent that value, whatever it may be. In programming, it's exactly the same. Your variables exist. Oftentimes we use X as a variable. Your variables just exist to represent unknown information. Sometimes that information is going to be put by the user. Sometimes it's derived from some other operation. The key thing to understand is that the variable in these equations here, where we have 2 plus x and 4 plus x, the variable is just a stand-in for information that we have not yet determined. Tupperware for your brain. So what's in a name? This is a slightly tongue-in-cheek reference. If you've not seen the image right above me, that is from the 1996 Romeo and Juliet adaptation. Wow, is it a bad movie? It's one of the most unintentionally funny movies of all time. That's not relevant to programming. I like to remind people that it exists and that it does involve Romeo and Juliet set in Malibu, but with the exact same language. They still speak in Shakespearean English, but also they drive convertibles. Just gonna let that sink in for a second. All right, and moving on back to programming. We're going to, depending on the language and the paradigm, like I said, there are a lot of different kinds of variables, and different people will disagree about what constitutes each type of variable and whether or not you can even have a generic variable. What's important to understand here is that all we're really trying to describe are sort of bins for the types of variables. So we're going to discuss Pythons in a few lessons. We're going to spend very long times in each of the Module 2 lessons deep diving the different types of Python variable. But for now, we're just going to use the broad terms of number, string, and structure. So numbers. A number is a single number in the real number set. Complex numbers can be represented in programming. Generally speaking, there are special modules and libraries to do that for you or to help you do it. Generally speaking, you're going to be working in real numbers in programming unless you're doing some very specific, unless you're working in physics or in mathematics or whatever. When you're writing a program, you're going to deal with real numbers most of the time. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, onward to infinity ad infinitum, 0.1, 0.01, 0.001, 0.0001, etc. Things like pi or e or the natural log, all of those are real numbers. All of those are relatively easy to represent with programming variables. Strings, which are actually sort of a derivation of numbers, right? In programming, we've talked about in our last video, all of computer science is derived from 0 and 1. Therefore, strings really are just representations to the screen, to the user, to the program of zeros and ones. That said, strings are their own type of variables because they do operate differently from numbers. They generally exist to hold one or more printable characters. It's possible to use non-printable characters in strings. You'll see that used a lot in pen testing and in exploit development. But generally speaking, a string will hold one or more printable characters. Here we see uppercase A, lowercase a, punctuation, weird marks, or sentences, entire arrays of character. Finally, structures. Now, structures is a very, 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 very broad description. All it really means is some sort of abstract data type derived from numbers and strings. Really, what that means is derived from numbers. So structures can be used to represent all sorts of things. There are structures out there that will represent entire web servers. There are structures, as you can see over the side, I have a blueprint. There are structures that are blueprints for code or blueprints for buildings. A structure, again, is just sort of an abstract data type that represents something that's more complex, that needs more operational capability than just numbers. So knowledge check, and I left these on the screen because I really want to just dig into it rather than kind of doing a quiz. But which data type is X in each of the following statements? X equals test is a string because, and this is very important, this is one of the reasons why I didn't make this a quiz, instead made it a check, strings are almost always going to be enclosed in quotes. In Python, which is the class you're taking, strings are always enclosed in quotes. They might be a single quote, they might be a double quote, they might be a set of 3 double quotes and single quotes on either side, and we'll talk about what that's for in a while, but they will be enclosed in quotes. That's how you know it's a string. One of the main gotchas, if you look down to the third item here where X equals object1, that's a structure because there aren't quotes. Python will interpret that as a variable, not as a string. So a lot of times when you're writing Python code, people will forget their quotes and their program will break and they won't understand why, and they'll come to me, Joe, I don't know what's happening, what's wrong with my code, can you fix it? And I put in a pair of quotes and then they have to walk away shamefaced. So that's one of the first things you want to check, and we're going to talk about gotchas as we go through this course. There are a lot of sort of specific problems that crop up over and over again in programming, and that's one of the big ones. And of course, X equals 1.2, in that case, X is a variable, a number variable. So, summary, what do we cover in this video? Well, what are variables? The answer to that question is Tupperware for your brain. And then we broadly talked about what types of variables exist, numbers, strings, and structures. So that's really all there is for this video. I hope to see you back in our next one, which is going to be programming basics if statements. We're going to start out on flow control. And that may not seem exciting, but it really, really is, because that's one of the first steps you have to take to writing true functional, real programs. I hope to see you back. As always, I've been your instructor, Joe Perry, and you are watching this on Cybrary On Demand.